Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Council Business Planning Committee of the Whole. This evening, of course, we are dealing with a variety of issues around budget. The roll call this evening, Councillor Renchima is home with, she can't speak, so she is away. Councillor McPherson, I understand, is away, but the rest of Council is here, so to my far right, Councillor Brunet, Councillor Timmers, Councillor Thompson, and Mayor Easton. And to my left, Councillor McMillan and Councillor Pachariva. We have pretty much every senior staff member here this evening. Just quickly, we have Amanda Fife in the back. She's our Wizard of Finance. Angela Safani, our Treasurer. Kathleen Dale, our Director of Planning. Dave Graham, who is single. Not Graham's, and Director of Public Works. John Brown, our IT guru. Carrie Beattie, who is looking after our communications. Greg Hudson and Bill Blake, our Chief and Deputy Chief in the Fire Department. Rosalie Potter as well. And also we have William Kalasa and Mike Krikopoulos. Are there any declarations of interest before we begin? Seeing none. Confirmation of agenda. We have a change in the agenda this evening that we have to do. There's an evolving situation within the municipality that we have to do a closed session for. So we'll be adding a special closed session actually at the very beginning of this meeting to tonight's to consider litigation or potential litigation, a matter pertaining to a bylaw enforcement activity. So no, we're going to do it immediately based on my discussion with Mr. Krikopoulos. So we have motions coming. Good. And just for you guys in the audience, it should be 5 to 10 minutes at the most that we have to go into closed session. So by the way, we'll be leaving. We'll be going to the Beams room. So. Moved by Councillor Timmers, seconded by Councillor Brunet. The committee adjourned to closed session to consider a litigation or potential litigation matter, a matter pertaining to a municipal bylaw enforcement situation. Any questions to the motion? All those in favor? That is carried, and so we shall adjourn to the Beams room. Okay, thank you for everybody's patience. I have a motion moved by Councillor Thompson, seconded by Councillor... Okay, which one is that? You, Brunet? Is that you? Yes. Okay, good. That committee resume an open session. All those in favor? That's carried. Honestly, Lynn's is so terrible too. I really can't tell the difference. So it's okay. This evening we have a public hearing concerning water and wastewater rates for 2017, and as well we're going to be dealing with a variety of reports around budget. So we will start into our public meeting first of all. This is a public hearing concerning the 2017 water and wastewater rates and charges and 2017 budget. Members of the public present are advised that in addition to this evening's presentation on the budget, we also have the opportunity for any public comments with respect to the proposed 2017 water and wastewater rates and 2017 budget. Council is proposing to set the rates charged by the Town of Lincoln for the treatment and distribution of water and the collection and treatment of wastewater, and to establish a 2017 budget. Council is also proposing to approve the budget as presented this evening and will take into account comments from the public. Once all comments have been received, the public meeting will be concluded and this committee will consider any public comments during the report section of tonight's agenda. The public meeting shall now commence. To the clerk, have we received any written submissions? We have not. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Krikopoulos, who will briefly explain where we're at with water and wastewater rates, just so that we have a starting point with this. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take a stab at providing a brief overview and then turn it over to Director Amanda Fife, who can give you just a little bit more detail as it relates to the water and wastewater rates. I think as we reported through committee and to council, the town of Lincoln has developed and implemented policies to provide for full cost recovery of the town's water and wastewater distribution system. The water and wastewater charges cover the cost of bringing water to and from your property, including Niagara Region treatment charges, maintenance and operations, general and administration, and capital replacement program costs. You'll recall at the last committee of the whole, when we were at the last council, when we were before you, there was a presentation by Watson proposing a go-forward position on our water and wastewater rates. Once every 5 years, or 5 to 6 years, we have Watson come in. We have them look at our water and wastewater rates and provide advice in terms of what the next 5 years looks like. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, who can take you through a little bit more detail what we're proposing for council consideration.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So as Mr. Kirkopoulos had said, every 5 years a rate study is conducted, and this is what has driven our recommendation today. So December 5th, Watson Associates presented this rate study to council, and 2 scenarios regarding water and wastewater rates were presented. Both of these scenarios include a change in practice, moving towards an increase in the base charge while holding the rate constant. Feedback from council led staff to look into a 3rd scenario, or a status quo scenario, which is more consistent with prior year practices and adjusted for inflation only. So based on this rate study and associated benefits, staff still recommends scenario 2. This option focuses on the increase to the base charge, which lowers the town's risk of revenue fluctuations if volumes change. Our current base charge only covers 6 to 7%, with best practice indicating that this should be between 15 and 30%. It addresses seasonal changes and the unpredictability of weather patterns. It improves customer satisfaction surrounding costs incurred from summer bills. And lastly, this scenario yields the lowest increase to the consumer in 2017. By reducing the high season rate, holding the low season rate constant, and increasing the base charge, the average bill will reduce 2.3%, or $20.34 in 2017. With this reduction, the change in the reserve fund is the smallest of all 3 scenarios, while still maintaining a healthy and stable balance for the long-term sustainability of the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I will turn it open for public comments. So is there anyone present who would like to speak on the 27 water and wastewater rates? Please come forward.
Well, I had a lot to say, but
yeah.
Scenario 2. If you could come to the microphone, sir, and please state your name and spell your surname for the record.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else here this evening who would like to speak to the water and wastewater rates? Seeing none, there being no other persons present to address the members of council, I'm going to declare this public meeting closed. So now we shall move into our report section of the evening. And the very first report this evening is the 2017 Ontario Regulation 28409 Compliance Report. Mr. Kirkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Director Fife will just give you a brief overview on that report. This is a report that we bring to you each and every year as part of the budget process.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. This is a housekeeping report that indicates that there are non-cash items such as amortization and post-employment benefits that are not reflected in the budget process and do not affect the levy.
Okay, are there any questions to Amanda on this? Seeing none, I have a motion moved by Councillor Thompson and seconded by Mayor Easton that report TR 1623 regarding the budget reporting requirements of Ontario Regulation 284/09 passed under the Municipal Act 2001 be received as information, and that Council adopt the compliance report for expenses excluded from the 2017 budget as a requirement of Ontario Regulation 284/09 passed under the Municipal Act 2001. Are there any questions to this motion? All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, no, I jumped ahead. Go ahead, Mary Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about ongoing. We heard as part of the budget process that we're going to be seeing a fairly large number of retirements in the years to come. I'm curious to know whether we need to be planning for additional funds. The amount that was projected for the future didn't seem to reflect that report. I think the number was 40% of our public works staff. I just wondered if the CAO maybe could give us a little bit of a context in that regard.
So, Mr. Kirkopoulos, any comments to that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, let me take a quick stab, I think, at addressing some of the statistics that we did share with you in our previous budget reports. We highlighted between now and 2021 that 40%, to quote the mayor, of our sport, recreation, and culture staff will be retiring or eligible to retire. What we do here, as we look at future post-employment expenses, is actually do those on a year-by-year basis. Having said that, as we look at what are our potential risks and future liability, we need to make sure that, we are preparing for those and we're making those accommodations in year and on a yearly basis as we look at who's retiring and where those retirements are occurring and the age of those retirements as well. So I don't know if either Angela or Amanda have anything further to add.
No, we're good.
So, Mr. Chairman, we're going to be watchful, but I'm not hearing that we should be putting any more into a reserve or having some methodology for consideration for the future.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, when we look at what's currently projected over the long term, we've got over $500,000 in those post-employment expenses. Again, I think what we're trying to do here is report to you on those on a year-by-year basis and make the necessary adjustments on a year-by-year basis. As it relates to our reserves and how we plan for these post-employment expenses, I'm going to suggest at this point in time, that isn't a risk or that isn't a concern for us. However, again, if Angela or Amanda have anything further to add or any additional detail.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we actually engage in an actuarial report once a year to identify these expenses. So at year end, when we do get this report, this is how we move forward the next year with these expenses. So they do help with our projections.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. I understand.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions with anyone? I did read the motion earlier. I can read it again, or we can just say all those in favor. And that's carried. So I won't read it again. Okay, our next report is TR 16-22. This is the 2017 water and wastewater rates discussion paper. So, Mr. Kirkopoulos, you mentioned this earlier. So, is there you, or would you, or Rosalie, or Amanda, or Angela wish to say anything to this?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think the only other comment that I do want to make, and again, I don't know if it was lost when we had Watson presenting because there was a lot of information. The town has been very aggressive in its infrastructure rehabilitation, more specifically, I think, with our water distribution system. So I did want to mention that. I did want to highlight that. Again, what we're proposing to you here is a 5-year look at what we anticipate happening and what our reserves will look like at the end of this. We do want to be prudent in terms of ensuring that we've got enough money in our reserves to address any of the infrastructure needs that we have. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we keep in mind affordability and the other principles that council has set for us. So what you're going to see in 2017 is a 2% decrease in our water and wastewater charges that residents will experience on their bill, and then a consistent 2, 2, 2, and 3, taking us through to 2021. And I'm going to suggest that that is in line with the Consumer Price Index, that is in line with inflation. We will be back before you in 2021, the next time we have Watson and/or another consultant who reviews our rate. But I do take comfort in the fact that we have had an external agent like Watson come in, look at where we are at, highlight that our system is in good shape, and provide these recommendations in terms of long-term sustainability moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, I'm pleased to see that we're actually starting to look towards more of a fixed cost on this. We've been very aggressive and very good stewards of making sure that our system is in good shape and replacement in a timely manner to keep it up to snuff. And as with most of the rest of the utilities that I'm experiencing, certainly they're all going towards a fixed, a more heavily weighted fixed model, and we are. I'm glad to see we're starting to look at that, because I think that's with everybody conserving. We would end up holding the short end of the stick on this if we didn't. So, thank you.
Mary Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make reference to one of the review documents that we saw last evening at the Planning Committee, I'll call it the Blue Report, that was quite specific about the sewer and water future work that needed to be done across the entire region. And for me, that further validated the fact that we needed to be very sharp here in terms of making sure that we have money available. And when I look at the impact that our 10-year capital plan in regard to water, wastewater, including those items, will have on the regional budget, I'm pleased that I supported the 1% infrastructure increase. We will find ourselves in a real jackpot if we're not paying attention. And all the indicators are out there that these costs are really growing in leaps and bounds, and just in terms of getting the work done. So I think that these are modest increases, and they're necessary to maintain the integrity of what we have here.
Any other questions or comments? I guess it sounds like Wayne and I have been on this council for like 97 years. We haven't, but we were back here in the heady days of 9% increases in water and wastewater, and took the beating that we did when things switched over to the full cost recovery. So I'm really pleased to see where this has been heading. We've seen over the last couple of years much better improvements to the increases that have been seen. My only question on this yet, first of all, I was a little disappointed in the Watson presentation. It's been Gary Scanlon that has been doing this for us in the past, and he actually was the architect for most of this for us originally. I was a little disappointed in some of the comments by the presenters that evening, because we have been burying pipe and doing stuff like crazy, opposite many other things within this municipality for years. So, and in fact, Councillor Patriva can probably tell us the exact number of meters of iron pipe that we still have in the ground that are about to be replaced and stuff like that as well. So, I think we're in pretty good shape, and it looks like everything's good within the water and sewer reserves. Question for you, though, Mr. Kakopoulos, or perhaps to Amanda. Is there a downside to the increase in the fixed fee within it? I mean, I can understand some of the thinking process around that, but I'm not completely sold that an increase of that fixed fee is what I'm in favor of. So I'm just curious, is there a downside to it that potentially we could be running into with that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, let me take a stab, and I think I'll start by trying to identify what are some of the upsides of going to a fixed rate that is more predictable. And I think they're highlighted in the report, and that is really around dry years when we have, or when residents have higher volumes. That results in those increased variable or volume rates, which lead to larger bills. We have looked at that seasonal adjustment because, again, that's a complaint that we have heard. I think, historically, a number of municipalities looked at higher variable rates and not necessarily moving those fixed rates because it did promote water conservation and it did look at, those sorts of things. I think that course correction and the education that's happened, I'm going to suggest not just in this community, but in communities across the province have resulted in water conservation remaining fairly uniform and water conservation being something that people are fairly cognizant of. When we look at it and we look at the recommendations from Watson, I don't see a massive downside or a risk in moving to a more fixed recovery model. It does also allow us to rely less on reserve funds during those wet seasons where volumes of water usage are lower. So from a staff perspective, and I think in listening to Watson, who has done this, and folks like Gary who were involved in this particular study, albeit Nancy was presenting, the recommendation is definitely to move in this direction. I think, it's somewhat misleading, when we see a chart and we're the lowest. I think that's not necessarily always a bad thing. I think incremental increases and incremental improvements in the system are what we're hoping to achieve. But if Angela and or Amanda have anything to add relative to any risks from a finance perspective that I've missed.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no risks. From my professional opinion, increasing the base charge is where I think we should be going.
We'll start with Councillor McMillan and Councillor Patriva.
Just to iterate what you had said earlier, that this is a first for me to see a water and wastewater budget like this, and I'm particularly pleased with the seasonal structure that's put in place in this. That makes a lot of sense to me. So I don't have any difficulty with this scenario at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be remiss if I didn't answer your question. After we do the Drake survey, we will have completely replaced all of our cast iron water mains in the town of Lincoln. So, and then we'll tackle, the cement lined. But you know what? We took that information from the Watson Group and Mr. Scanlon a few years ago, which put us on that really, I want to say, and the word is escaping me right now, but if I talk long enough, I think it will come back. I want to say advanced, but it's not the word. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Aggressive tact of, replacing our water mains. And you know what? It's put us in the enviable position, that now our water and our wastewater system is self-sustaining. You know what? And now is the time to tackle the fixed rate. The Watson Group didn't steer us wrong before, put us in good financial stead, and I think that by addressing the base rate, and this was the whole problem, is that the consumer became very good in conserving water. So the peaks that we used to take advantage of were no longer there. So I think like a lot of the other municipalities are addressing that infrastructure shortfall. By having done this effectively in the water and wastewater, we can tackle the fixed costs And then our infrastructure imbalance is just in the roads, and that capital levy that we're undertaking will address that. So you know what, I think, and I'm happy to say, I think we're going to be the leaders in infrastructure renewal. We already are in water and wastewater, and we'll get on that roadside. And it's also really good to know that it's what you see is what you get. We don't prop it up with a tax levy like some of the other municipalities have done, and we've been aggressive at doing our system. And, you know, it's not sexy by any means. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it. But you know what? The results are in this report that we did it. So and the fact too that we listened to people, because that was, you know what, the number one complaint that I would hear is that, you know, I'm filling my pool and I'm getting dinged for it. Well, we've taken that seasonality in that Councillor McMillan addressed. You know what? I think I'm proud of this.
Any other comments? Seeing none, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva, seconded by Councillor McMillan, that report TR 16-22 regarding the proposed water and wastewater rates be received, and that Council approve in principle the information contained within and refer the proposed rates to the December 19th, 2016 Council meeting as part of the budget for final ratification. Are there any questions to this motion? All those in favor? It's carried. Oh, I guess I'll go this way. So Mr. Kirkopoulos is going to take us through the 2017 final operating capital budget recommendations and summary. So this is a PowerPoint presentation that he is going to be producing. I believe we have copies as well, but
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, thanks for the opportunity to be here and present what staff hope is our final 2017 budget update. You know, I can say I think we've been in front of you a number of times, and we're going to just take you through a little bit of a recap in terms of where we were and what our next steps are, and I think some of the decisions that Council made and where we're stopping or where we're ending in terms of this budget. So I'm going to give you a quick capital budget recap. It seems like it was a few months ago when we started talking to you about capital and the decisions that Council made. Give you an operating budget recap, the updated tax levy scenarios for final budget consideration, and then next steps. So in terms of our capital budget, we started our capital budget presentation on November 9th. We reviewed the 2017 capital budget revenue and expenditures. We took you through the capital budget by department. We looked at our projects, our reserves, and our long-term debt. Council direction did occur following those meetings to look at the following projects, to either remove, delay, defer, or altogether try a different approach. So just quickly an update there on the 4 projects that Council had the most significant deliberation on and changes were made. That is the library technology upgrade. You'll recall yourself, Chair Foster and Councillor Thompson directed us to remove this item and to consider for operating budget implications more service integration with the town. We deferred the Beamsville Fire Station temporary accommodations, and again, you know, I mentioned the ARC process here. Yesterday at planning, we also had conversations around the ARC process, and I think as we look at just all the needs that are going on and what our long-term plan is for both this facility and other facilities, I think Council's desire to defer this work was something that the staff agreed with, and I think was a prudent course of action. Project 34 was the Jordan Arena and Pool communication. This was, again, one of those items that was council-driven and council-led. Chair Foster, yourself, and Councillor Thompson had us look at a different way to address this particular item, and so we removed $15,000 from capital and moved $2,500 instead into our operating budget. And then once again, a deferral of a massive expenditure for a town hall generator, looking at what are the long-term needs and the long-term plans for this particular site. So just again, I kind of look by the numbers. Our 2017 total capital budget is a little over $11.5 million. The levy portion of that is $1.255 million, and that is an increase from 2016 of a little over $37,500. In terms of our operating budget recap, we had a number of operating budget planning sessions over the last month, November 23rd, 30th, and council on December 5th. If you recall, when we first presented to you, we were pretty much at 9%, at 8.92 for the town's portion of the budget. Council's direction at that time, I think, was very clear. That was too high, that was too aggressive, and we needed to look at how we could lower that, find some savings, and be very cognizant of residents' affordability and willingness for what residents were okay for and what council really wanted us to look at. At the same time, you did want us to look long-term, determine what our wants, our needs, and how we would move forward. Fast forward to November 30th, we had come back with some revised scenarios for council, and those ranged from anywhere from 8% to a little over 7.5%. And then there were a number of questions around special consideration and staffing needs. At that meeting, and leaving that meeting on November 30th, we were given some direction to adjust the library board capital budget to reflect some potential cost savings, as well as the sharing of the IT resources. There was also an inclusion of some development charges that arose as a result of a conversation with the Public Library Board and where those funds were being allocated. We also proceeded with the preparation of a final draft 2017 budget based on what I had told you was budget scenario 3, the one that at that point in time I was recommending, and that put us a little over 7.5%, and that we would come back on December 5th. At that point in time, that had included a look at and some accommodations for the BIA, but removal of some other things around the TVTA ask and a different look at what we would do with Canada 150, for example, as well as the FTE asks. Again, council was very specific around asking us to demonstrate the need and why we were looking at the potential FTEs we were looking at. So fast forward to December 5th, the last time we were before you. Staff updated council on the budget. We had slightly decreased once again the budget from that 7.64 to 7.38, and then presented you with that blended rate. Council direction for today was to further review our FTE business cases, to start to have conversations as a senior management team, to look at what are the job descriptions and what information that we potentially had and that we hadn't looked at, and again, 7.38 being fairly substantial still. Could we go back? Could we look at what needed to happen and how we would either defer certain items or continue to whittle away at that 7.38? On December 8th, Niagara Region approved their budget, and our blended rate is often based on assumptions we make for the region. The region had set targets, but no different than what we were looking at. The region decided to move forward with a special capital levy of 1%, which definitely had an impact on what their budget increase was, and then also amended what our blended rate would be. I presented this to you at the last meeting, and I thought it was important again once to present to you, what this I think slide shows, and that is, when we look at our budget and we make the accommodations for inflation, when we make the accommodations for utility increases, the bids, the tenders we're receiving, the cost of construction as well as inflation, and the negotiated collective agreement salary adjustments and some of the other things you've seen there, we're really at a 4% budget. Some of those are uncontrollable. Now, definitely within our control, and you've seen in this budget where we've tried to make some incremental improvements on materials in terms of our operations, whether that be parks, cemeteries, beautification, roads, other sort of public work items, as well as addressing, I think, some of the priorities that council had around a transit pilot, some of the wayfinding signage. You'll also see us focus a lot on our master plans and plannings for our parks as well. So this is really what, what I'm calling that kind of base budget, if we were not to look at any of the other special considerations that council had before us. So fast forward to where we are today, and we're going to present to you the tax levy scenarios that, as an SMT and as your CAO, that we'll be recommending. So scenario presented on December 5th with those updates, as I shared with you on the previous slide, was 7.38%. The amendments we've made to that scenario since December 5th, again, I've heard this loud and clear from a lot of members of council, the regard for taxpayer affordability in determining what is acceptable in terms of an increase. We did present to you where we were over the last 12 years and what the average increase was, and that was around 4%. And I did highlight at a number of meetings, council has definitely made investment in the organization. You've continued to be very aggressive with what you're investing in. And, last year we saw an increase of almost 5.5%. We've also, we've deferred a position. We had 4 positions in front of you. What you see here is 3 positions. And I'll take you through our kind of rationale and what I'm asking for as it relates to the positions that we've deferred. So we are going to defer. We were presenting you a lot of information on our emergency management coordinator. And I'll preface all this by saying I wouldn't have presented any of these 4 FTEs if I didn't think, and if I didn't believe in them, if I didn't think they were necessary. But I understand in hearing council's questions and hearing, more information and analysis that you've wanted, we have deferred the emergency management coordinator, so we've removed that from the budget. I think we need to do some further analysis and scope and go through a scope exercise in emergency management and some of the master plan recommendations that we have before you. I think what I am asking for, and that is that, in principle, you allow me to come back to you later in 2017 or as part of our 2018 budget process, and I think look at this position and give you a much, a little bit of a different business case. Both the chief and I have reached out to our counterparts in other municipalities, looking at, is there an option around emergency management to potentially partner with, for example, West Lincoln, to look at, is there a piece of that? Maybe to look at, is a full-time FTE required for that, or do we look at something different? There are some revenue pieces that the chief and our fire staff are focused on, and some administrative functions around that are currently being done by our senior fire staff. I want to come back to you on that whole issue around revenue and around emergency management, and look at what comes from the conversation. I've reached out to the CAO in West Lincoln. I know the chief was going to reach out to the fire chief there as well. We can also look at other municipalities and make sure that what we're doing around emergency management prepares us. And again, I do ask that you give me the opportunity to come back to you late in 2017 or as part of the 2018 budget process on that. And again, council can make those decisions, but I definitely think it's something important that we need to look at. And the last one, we are, I am recommending the legislative coordinator position, but I did hear council. You want us to make sure that we do a core services review, and that is definitely something that we'll be moving forward. And I wanted to put that here very clear for council in terms of what we propose on doing there. So when I look at our new recommended scenario, and that is the deferral of the 1 FTE, what you have before you is a 6.95% increase on the town's portion of the budget, and that equates to a overall blended rate of 3.22%, taking into consideration the region's budget increase and the other elements of the waste management and school board. So just a recap of where we sit from our current tax levy perspective. Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but we did take into account taxpayer affordability. We did look at the FTEs. I'm appreciative of council's support on the FTEs. I know it's never easy for us to add additional complement, and the questions you're asking are the right questions. We have invested what I'm saying today for tomorrow. A lot of municipalities, more than half now, are investing in this infrastructure levy, and that has added 1% to the overall budget. We're investing in both basic, soft, and hard infrastructure. and as well trying to absorb, the rising cost of basic services and utilities that everyone else is doing. I did highlight Canada 150. I know when we had this conversation around Canada 150, and Councillor Timmers can attest to this as it relates to Canada 150, as well as the mayor. We had some concerns. What if we don't get any grant funding? How can we deal with it? I think, Chair Foster, it was you that said, in these cases, sometimes we look to the rate stabilization reserve. So just so that it's here, and those members of our committee and the community that are listening and will look at this presentation, I did highlight Canada 150 funding. We've removed it from the budget, but there is a commitment to grants and the rate stabilization reserve. And I think once we hear back on those, on those grants, we'll be before you, updating you as it relates to Canada 150. So when I look at our overall budget, I've broken it down again into the particular percentages that I've highlighted. 4.16 as it relates to the base budget, a special levy of an additional 1%. The FTEs at a little over 1.5%. The BIA support at 0.27, taking us to a town portion of 6.95 and a blended rate of 3.22. So you've seen this slide before, and I think each time it changes depending on the adjustments that council makes. I think when we started, we were looking at a impact per household at almost $122. I think due to council and some of the staff adjustments that we've made, we are looking at an increase of $94 per year, and not taking you through the cycle here, but about a quarter a day increase in terms of this particular budget. So in terms of final approval, we've got the capital budget that we've given you an overview once again on. Our operating budget, we've just dealt with our water and wastewater rates, and December 19th will be the ratification of this particular budget. We do have a motion that is ready, Councillor Foster, on this particular budget pending, I think, questions and any further deliberation that council may have.
Thank you, Mike. You've presented to us, and you and staff have done an absolute ton of work to get us to where we are, and you've presented us with a very fair, I think, as well as well thought out budget from the process we've gone through. So anyway, we'll start and go through some questions if anybody has them. Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you very much, Chair Foster. Through you to the CAO. Certainly, I understand where you're coming from for the FTE for the fire department, and I appreciate the fact that yourself and the chief will be reaching out to the other communities. Perhaps a conversation in and around an overarching emergency management department at the region, as opposed to putting it into the lower tier municipalities' hands that would coordinate with all the fire chiefs, as opposed to might be a conversation that might be had instead of having it be in our budget, actually having it be in theirs. So anyway, just a thought.
I have Councillor McMillan and then Councillor Patriva.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mike, the concern I have is with the FTEs. If we go back to this slide when you were talking about the amendments to the December 5 scenario, it talks about the emergency management coordinator, and in the second bullet, it says that it's approval in principle, but even approval in principle, there is no money in the budget for that. Okay, that's fine, and I agree with that. The next one, the legislative coordinator, will move forward. This one is still reliant on some further work that you need to do within the corporate services department, yet it is still included in the budget as well. Why not? Why is this one, the legislative coordinator, why is it not in the same position as the other one that is taken out of the budget, but approval in principle, and then returned later on? And that's one scenario. The other is that, as far as the legislative coordinator position is concerned, I think it should be removed from the budget and never put back in again. I don't agree with that position at all. If we look at increasing staff within the town, I think those increases need to be on frontline staff. Because as we've known just in the last couple of weeks and things that I've had to say about things that have been sitting, that frontline staff, there's not enough frontline staff to get those kinds of results that we want in the time that we want them. And that is much more critical to me than it is for a legislative coordinator that is going to give some advice on how to take minutes or you know, what a council member should be doing and what he can't be doing, those kinds of things. I don't see it as, for me personally, I don't think I need that kind of assistance. I need the other kind of assistance, the frontline staff that are going to get the work done. So to the two questions then, if the first one is being removed from the budget, but approval in principle, can the same thing happen with the legislative coordinator, approve in principle and come back later on, or take the legislative coordinator position completely out of the budget? I think that that's a valid move. I think that 6.95 is still too high, and this is just a small piece that'll bring it down a little bit, but I really don't like the idea of a legislative coordinator.
Through Mr. Chairman, I think let me take a stab at trying to address your question, Councillor. I think the reason we're looking at them different, I understand Council had some, concerns around the legislative coordinator. If I'm going to suggest, the most questions I've got is definitely around that particular position. I do believe we need to, provide some further clarity on emergency management. And when I say, seeking approval in principle, I want approval to come back to you to present a business case, not to remove and never come back to you as it relates to the emergency management position. I think we need to clarify some of the needs. I think, when we look at some of the work fire is doing and the legislative requirements that are being mandated upon us, it's incumbent upon me to bring that back. I do look at the increased work and the increased need that council has for legislative services. When I look at the work going on within corporate services, everything from risk to insurance to a number of the other items that are before us, I look at, the legal elements of it. I think council has been focused on us looking at what are our core services. You'll see that I've tried to do that with each of the departments. I understand your concerns, Councillor, as it relates to SRC and the items you brought up last week. I think one of the FTEs that we have within that department that is part of this budget will address that. And I know I've provided councillors updates as it relates to SRC, both in camera and out of camera. I'm going to suggest, I think, some of the work that SRC needs to accomplish is not necessarily frontline work, but work that needs to be strategically led as it relates to a review of some of the things that you've highlighted. I think, I'm very cognizant of the need for frontline staff, and I've challenged each of the directors, within their own budgets to look at, where there are abilities to, increase the number of hours or to look at repurposing positions when people move in. We've had people move out of positions, in positions, to look at how do we look at those dollars in that FTE and potentially, either collapse or bring in staff within the same framework of those dollars. I believe that the legislative coordinator, looking at the complexity and the needs of what council wants and the increase in the meetings that we're going to be having moving forward, is something that's important. I look at what legislative coordinators do, and we went through a very exhaustive, I think, look at that, both Mr. Kalas and I, around agenda and meeting management. And I understand, I think to a lot, and I was quoted in the paper, I think talking about, the legislative coordinator is more than just a note taker, a minute taker. And there's a huge customer service and public engagement piece to it, and really the legislative interpretation and responsibilities that come with it. But I respect what you're saying, Councillor. I believe it is an integral and important position for us moving forward.
I wasn't suggesting in the first place, and with the emergency management coordinator, I thought I heard you say to take that out and not or approve it in principle and never return to it. That's not what I said in that one. The approval in principle for the emergency management coordinator, I'm fine with that. It's just a legislative coordinator position. If in fact the legislative coordinator position stays within the budget, then I think we have a real selling job to do with our constituents because of all the items that are packed into the budget. The one that I've heard most about from my constituents is this legislative coordinator position. They don't know what it does. They don't know the importance of it. They think it is, as you mentioned, a note taker. So if in fact it does stay in the budget, that really has to be addressed. So that a very good description of what that person will do and why it needs to be done. Thank you.
Councillor Patrieva.
Thank you, Chair Foster. Just a question about the math, and maybe it's just me. So if you add up those four asks, 4.161, 1.53, and 0.27, I get 6.96. Now, I don't know if that changes rounding or something, so just want to throw that out there. But I'm very perplexed by Councillor McMillan, because last week you stood up and you said, you know what, 4 FTEs, we demanded the work, I support that. Now somehow over the course of a weekend you've got a complete 360. So we've taken one of the FTEs out, and that was the one that we asked a lot of questions about. You know, in an emergency, if an emergency arises. So if an emergency arises, the chief mobilizes the situation, Mr. Kirkopoulos and the chairs then act as that framework. We've invested in the IT so we can get through something, God forbid that ever happens. But you know what? We've added an economic development committee. We've added a active transportation committee. We can't expect. And it's not just a note taker. By no means is that it. So, you know, we're asking, we've got an aggressive timeline, we've got an aggressive stance on what we want to do. We need the people to be able to do it. We had this whole scenario, guys, last year. We tiptoed around the infrastructure levy and you caved. We would have been trendsetters in trying to fix the infrastructure gap. Now we're there. And Councillor Thompson, I love you to death, and I don't want to bring this up, but the whole thing around the communication person, right? We tap danced around that, we caved. Dave, to this day, still brings it up and blames himself. It's no different from when Mr. Graham came to us with the water wastewater position. Guys, we pay these people to run the organization. If they're asking us for people to do the job, and they've given us a business case, and it's, you know, we're not going to hire these people tomorrow, that might come down based on a review. It might take a quarter. You know, you got to give them the people to do the job. And then, you know, with the SRC, we've already split that out into the hard and the soft surfaces. And then those job descriptions in there will be further refined, and to make sure that we're getting the full potential out of those people. That there's checklists, that there's accountability, that there's the job being done. So we're not going to get that nonsense that we've had in the past. Oh, we need someone else to help clean at the arena. No, what we need to do is we need the staff there to do their job. So, you know what? We've got meetings now happening every Monday night, Tuesday nights, Thursday nights. We've taken the position of you know, trying to get a economic development officer. If anyone read the paper tonight, we're actually applauded for doing that. Rather than waiting around with the region and you know, we've got a Center for Excellence in Agriculture. You know what? For once, I'd like to be a trendsetter. I'd like to be out ahead of the curve and doing this. This is what we asked for. This is what we've got. We've shaved 3.22. I'm good. I was good when it was what it was before, because again, we backtracked last year on the blended. We can't continue to do that. There's one taxpayer, and the taxpayer is going to pay 3.22, all in.
Can I have a rebuttal?
Yeah, actually, I think I'm going to let you rebut. I think you deserve a shot at that, Wayne.
Yeah. I did say that it's an aggressive budget, and I did say it was an aggressive agenda, and that's true. And I am not objecting to the full-time equivalents that Mike has put forward in the budget, except in this one position. And if you, you know, maybe you won't have somebody cleaning up the arena, but we'll have a legislative officer sitting here in Town Hall.
So, Mike, I'll let you have a quick comment because it looks like everybody wants to talk now. Anyway, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, more of an overarching comment, and I thought I'd save it, but maybe I will. I'll mention it now because I think Councillor McMillan highlighted that. You know, he highlighted the sell job that I think needs to happen. I think I said it at a previous meeting. You know, at the end of the day, you're going to have to hold me accountable. You're going to have to hope that next year, and I'm not going to suggest hope, next year this time, you need to see visible change, and that is either both in the way people feel about the municipality and the services we provide, and that is those hard and soft services, as well as the interaction they have with us, and whether that be that interaction here at committee, whether that be the interaction when we're providing them services, you know, on the road. The accountability at the end of the day, if we don't meet the outcomes that council has set, you know, will be with me, and I think council needs to hold me accountable. I don't come to you and make these recommendations on this on these FTEs lightly. Councillor McMillan, I completely hear your concerns. If we do need to make a sell job, then that's on me and our senior management team to do that. I think oftentimes when you look at these legislative positions, it is hard to, I think, you know, get the average resident to understand what is all the legislative obligations we have. What are those things around code of conduct, the ombudsman, the investigations that happen, the fact that we don't have a lot of these other roles that oftentimes you know, our clerk staff need to take on. But I completely understand, you know, your comments and your concerns.
Before I go to the rest, just kind of in the same vein, I'm glad you said what you did just now. And definitely your feet are going to be held to the fire on some of these things for sure. That's your job. And I'm closer to agreeing with Councillor McMillan than the other that was stated here. But I truly, like you have said to us, we need this, trust me, we're going to go. So we're going to have to make sure if this is actually passed that we're watching very carefully what the position is doing and how it's progressing within it, because there will be expectations within that. And just the other thing is, I totally agree with the comment, is that there's going to have to be communication going on with this. We're going to have to let, like, out of this entire budget process, we're going to have to put together, Carrie, an extremely good communication process as to what's going on with this, because again, even some of the information that we've received, I've passed on emails that I've received as well, and there's a lot of misconception about some of these things in the community. So anyway, there's I know you're going to do a great job with that. So Mayor Easton, and then Councillor Bernay, and then Councillor Timmers.
Mr. Chairman, would you have the councillor speak first and I'll speak last?
Sure.
Thank you.
Speak last because I'm the chair, but that's okay. Councillor Bernay, and then Councillor Timmers, and then Councillor Patriva.
Thank you, Chair Foster. My comments are kind of redundant now, but I will say a few words. What I was going to say before the CAO spoke was, you know, I agree with Councillor McMillan in the fact that, you know, we need to communicate this. I was fairly outspoken against the CAO early in the budget process, where I was asking him on a number of occasions why he was so ambiguous on the FTEs. As we sit here tonight, I'm very comfortable with the business case that he has presented. And so that's what when I put my hand up, I wanted to say that I completely agree with Councillor McMillan that we do have a communication issue that we need to communicate to our constituents. But I'm very, very comfortable with this business case that's been presented to us on this particular FTE, and I fully support it. I certainly appreciate Councillor McMillan's comments that you know, we've got people, don't know the exact terminology used, but you know, whether it's a person working at the arena or somebody behind the scenes, those are concerns. But I think as we move forward, you know, we have a number of things that we're trying to achieve, and we need someone here to guide us through these. And this business case, as far as I'm concerned, is solid, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to echo a lot of Councillor Bernet's comments. I fully support the FTEs. I like the way the emergency one has been put off to look at further, you know, in 2017 or 18. I'm pleased with that. I see the need for the legislative position. It is a very good business case. We do need the support. We're increasing, adding 4 new standing committees, and we need support on those committees. We need someone sitting there who understands the laws and the bylaws and the procedures and leads us and guides us properly through what we're doing. Our workload has increased substantially, and oftentimes at some of the committee meetings, I don't feel we have the support that perhaps we should have. And in this day and age, we've got to dot the I's and cross the T's. It's got to be done properly. And so I support that position completely, and I'm very happy with where we're standing right now today with the budget, and those are my comments.
Next, I have Mr. Petrie.
Thank you, Chair Foster. Yeah, and I thought too, and one of the things too with the legislative coordinator, that as we move forward, we're going to be getting our agendas and our packages in a more timely fashion. So rather than a Friday, and I think the mayor spoke to this last time, rather than Friday at 5 o'clock, I think the target was shooting for a week out. So if you get a package Friday at 5 o'clock and you're going away for the weekend, and you know there was the scenarios with the road allowances, you really have no time to go out and walk those and do your due diligence, which you should be doing as a councillor. So, you know, and Councillor Timmers said this, you know, we've added these 4 new committees. There's going to be support. We need that. We don't want to get into a jackpot like the town of Grimsby did, you know, and some of the various other municipalities acting what they thought was right that isn't right. But, you know, we also all sit on you know, regional committees and other standing committees, and, you know, minutes and agendas are usually circulated a week prior. And I think that's part of the goal too, is to get those, you know, to us in a more timely fashion. And, you know, if there's any questions and if there's any meetings that need to be set up in the interim before those meetings, that can be done. So again, I'm fine with this.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I don't have to think very far back to remember last year's budget process. And I will once again, for the last time, take responsibility for the comms position. But I really do, I mean, we've sat here and asked Mike to come forward with his and his SMT group's professional recommendations on full-time equivalents, and based on the business cases that that have been brought forward to us, I'm completely in favor of those positions. At the end of the day, Mr. Kirkopoulos will be responsible for that, and I don't believe he's putting himself in a position where he feels he's going to be getting himself into hot water. So, like the rest on my right here, certainly I'm completely okay with where we are.
Before I go to Mayor Easton, just a quick comment. When I first got on council, there was 13 committees that we were on. We dropped it down to 5, and now we're up to about 8 or 9. So, you know, I don't think the argument on committees and stuff like that and that type of thing is as strong as you might think. But I happen to think that the legislative coordinator isn't a bad idea. So, but anyway, Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I won't repeat what others have said, but I will be taking a very firm stand on this. Other than Mr. Kirkopoulos, I think few of us have had the experience of working in a council where things are very disruptive, or in a committee where you are absolutely stymied by some policy or procedure at a legislative level. And to not have that person there who's responsible and accountable if a review is eventually done is becoming a real concern to me. When we came on council in 2014, we were, from the outset, for a variety of reasons and motivations, influencing a council-driven agenda. And our choice has been to push on, or we could have maintained the status quo. We did not choose that. We chose to push on. I personally have no difficulty with the energy that's gone into all of this. When I was working full-time, this was the pace I was used to. I don't expect everybody else to work at that pace. If they can't, I understand. But I think that as a council, we need to set the example, and we have definitely done that. So just as functionality in departments is key, we should not ignore our legislative responsibilities, and the issue of agenda management is serious. There is no agenda management. We get whatever is put together. There's no consultation beforehand, and I get the information when you get the information. So I consider that to be a very inadequate support to the mayor's office, not just my room, but for all mayors who come to this municipality. So I think it's very important for us to set the example in terms of what this position means, because it's paid at a very good level that complements the clerk's position. And it puts the clerk in a position of operating at a higher level and dealing with some of those really specialized issues. So if we don't have it, we'll hire somebody to help us with the code of conduct. If we don't have it, we'll be able to hire somebody to come in here and deal with issues that relate to the Ombudsman's office. But the minute we have one disruptive counselor, I can tell you that what we are paying this person so that the clerk can deal with what the clerk is going to have to deal with that individual, and what Mike is going to have to deal with is going to be substantial. And we're going to have to deal with it because our skills as chairs are going to have to become much more sophisticated. So I also have another issue about the whole business of who can be chair. I don't think that when you're elected that you should have to wait in order to participate in activities of council. You were elected, your constituents they've put us here so that we can all do the job. If you cannot take a risk and become chair of a committee because there's nobody to support you, then I think that the public lose some of their democratic imperative because they're expecting us all to participate at a very high level. So I don't think that we can really ignore that at all. I respect your position, Councillor McMillan. And if I had not worked with legislative assistants, I wouldn't have known what they did. The day that you need to have a motion prepared and the clerk is very busy with something else, these are the people that you go to. If you need to have a technical discussion about anything to do with the agenda or any matters to do with the procedure and how you are going to conduct yourself around those complicated areas, then you have to have that person there. This community does not deal with some sort of adjusted level of report. Because we're 24,000 people, we don't get reports that only have half the information in them. And there is not 25 or 30% less expectation in terms of how we're going to deal with those matters. So we cannot afford to be operating with one arm. And if we don't know our jobs and cannot articulate the support we need, the public certainly are not in a position to do that, but they certainly need to know that when we make these decisions that we are getting the metrics on how effective they are. So I will be supporting it. I'm satisfied with the recommendations that Mr. Kokopoulos is making. And of course, he will be reporting to us on a regular basis on how things are going, and we will know ourselves. But I would like to see every council member, when they begin their committee responsibilities in January, to know that very soon we are going to have someone who has complementary skills to the clerk in every one of those meetings, so that we never have to worry about anything to do with our committee procedures. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just one final statement. Opposition to one particular part of the budget does not mean that I will not support it. I will support the budget as it is being presented.
Yeah, I'm going to think about some of the items that the mayor has brought up at this point, because I happen to fundamentally disagree with a few of the comments, but I'll save that for a discussion at some other point. Are there any other things that anybody wants to bring up with the budget at this point? Mr. Kokopoulos, do you have any final comments?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do not. I mean, we do have a motion prepared for council consideration. I do want to, once again, I think, thank council for their patience. We have gone through a different process than historically what we've presented to you. I can suggest that we've gotten significantly more media attention, and with that comes that iterative back and forth with the community. I know I've personally either visited or responded or called members of the public, both good and those that had, some questions as it relates to, whether it be the FTEs or the increases. And I know Chair Foster and I also exchanged an email relative to one individual. I think you're right. It is about sharing information and ensuring that that information is shared there. So I do thank council once again, I think, for your patience as we took you through a different process. And as you allowed us to come back on a number of occasions as we lowered this budget. And I thank the senior management team, I think, for significant work dating back to when we were before you in July with the 10-year capital plan.
Thank you. Actually, I must say that this has been a really pleasant budget process to go through. I think we've got a lot on the table. I kind of like the methodology that you've walked us through with this as well, getting away from motion after motion, but giving solid direction to staff and coming back and discussing at the further meetings and stuff like that. I think that's worked really well. So, yes, Dave?
Thank you. Yeah, I actually would like to thank staff for having some patience with us. Not vice versa, because we've been really pushing for finding ways to streamline things. So I just want to thank staff for their patience.
You want those guys to sign that? I have a motion moved by Mayor Easton, seconded by Councillor Timmers, that report AD 1619 and the accompanying presentation regarding the 2017 budget update be received, and that the 2017 operating and capital budgets be approved and referred to council on December the 19th, 2016 for final ratification. Are there any questions to this motion? All those in favor? And there's one other motion coming here, so. And I have a motion moved by Mayor Easton, seconded by Councillor Thompson. Whereas the Council of the Town of Lincoln has evaluated the operational requirement for the Town of Lincoln to ensure the efficient delivery of municipal services to the ratepayers of the Town of Lincoln, now therefore be it resolved that the 2017 capital budget expenditures of $11,750,250 be approved. And further, that the 2017 operating budget be approved with a tax levy requirement of $14,001,539 for local municipal purposes. And further, that the Council of the Town of Lincoln direct staff to prepare the annual taxation levying bylaw as required by the Municipal Act 2001 upon the setting of the tax ratios and requisition amounts by the Regional Municipality of Niagara and other applicable bodies. Mr. Kirkopoulos, this particular motion is, of course, final on this. Any comments to this motion?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, I do not.
Okay. Sure. There's been a request for a recorded vote.
In the matter of the question just raised by Councillor Foster, I'll proceed in alphabetical order, and if you could indicate yay or nay, yes or no. Councillor Brunet.
Yay.
Councillor McMillan.
Yes.
Councillor McPherson is not here today. Councillor Pachariva.
Yes.
Councillor Rintajima is also not here today. Councillor Thompson.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Yay.
Councillor Foster, Chair Foster.
Yes.
If you want to declare the results.
So the results are unanimous other than the two councillors that weren't here. So that is carried. Okay. Mr. Kirkopoulos, anything else you wish to add this evening?
Through Mr. Chairman, no.
Okay. No.
I could, but there's no point in continuing.
Okay. We'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.